So the day came. It is difficult fully to describe my condition. There were, on the one hand, the zeal for reform and the novelty of making a momentous departure in life. There was on the other the shame of hiding like a thief to do this very thing. I cannot say which of the two swayed me more. We went in search of a lonely spot by the river, and there I saw for the first time in my life meat. There was baker's bread also. I relished neither. The goat's meat was as tough as leather. I simply could not eat it. I was sick and had to leave off eating. I had a very bad night afterwards. A horrible nightmare haunted me. Every time I dropped off to sleep, it would seem as though a live goat were bleating inside me, and I would jump up full of remorse. But then I would remind myself that meat eating was a duty and so become more cheerful. My friend was not a man to give in easily. He now began to cook various delicacies with meat and dress them neatly. And for dining, no longer was the secluded spot on the river chosen, but a state house with its dining hall and tables and chairs, about which my friend had made arrangements in collusion with the chief cook there. This bait had its effect. I got over my dislike for bread, forswore my compassion for the goats, and became a relisher of meat dishes, if not of meat itself. This went on for about a year, but not more than half a dozen meat feasts were enjoyed in all. Because the state house was not available every day, and there was the obvious difficulty about frequently preparing expensive savory meat dishes. I had no money to pay for this reform. My friend had therefore always to find the wherewithal. I had no knowledge where he found it, but find it he did, because he was bent on turning me into a meat eater. But even his means must have been limited, and hence these feasts had necessarily to be few and far between. Whenever I had occasion to indulge in these surreptitious feasts, dinner at home was out of the question. My mother would naturally ask me to come and take my food and want to know the reason why I did not wish to eat. I would say to her, "I have no appetite today, there is something wrong with my digestion." It was not without compunction that I devised these pretexts. I knew I was lying and lying to my mother. I also knew that if my mother and father came to know of my having become a meat eater, they would be deeply shocked. This knowledge was gnawing at my heart. Therefore I said to myself, though it is essential to eat meat and also essential to take up food reform in the country, yet deceiving and lying to one's father and mother is worse than not eating meat. In thy lifetime, therefore, meat eating must be out of the question. When they are no more and I have found my freedom, I will eat meat openly, but until that moment arrives, I will abstain from it. This decision I communicated to my friend, and I have never since gone back to meat. My parents never knew that two of their sons had become meat eaters. I abjured meat out of the purity of my desire not to lie to my parents, but I did not abjure the company of my friend. My zeal for reforming him had proved disastrous for me, and all the time I was completely unconscious of the fact. The same company would have led me into faithlessness to my wife, but I was saved by the skin of my teeth. My friend once took me to a brothel. He sent me in with the necessary instructions. It was all prearranged. The bill had already been paid. I went into the jaws of sin, but God, in His infinite mercy, protected me against myself. I was almost struck blind and dumb in this den of vice. I sat near the woman on her bed, but I was tongue-tied. She naturally lost patience with me and showed me the door with abuses and insults. I then felt as though my manhood had been injured and wished to sink into the ground for shame, but I have ever since given thanks to God for having saved me. I can recall 4 more similar incidents in my life, and in most of them, my good fortune rather than any effort on my part saved me. From a strictly ethical point of view, all these occasions must be regarded as moral lapses, for the carnal desire was there and it was as good as the act. But from the ordinary point of view, a man who is saved from physically committing sin is regarded as saved, and I was saved only in that sense. There are some actions from which an escape is godsend both for the man who escapes and for those about him. Man, as soon as he gets back his consciousness of right, is thankful to the divine mercy for the escape. As we know that a man often succumbs to temptation, however much he may resist it, We also know that Providence often intercedes and saves him in spite of himself. How all this happens, how far a man is free and how far a creature of circumstances, how far free will comes into play and where fate enters on the scene, all this is a mystery and will remain a mystery. But to go on with the story, even this was far from opening my eyes to the viciousness of my friend's company. I therefore had many more bitter draughts in store for me until my eyes were actually opened by an ocular demonstration of some of his lapses quite unexpected by me. But of them later as we are proceeding chronologically. One thing, however, I must mention now as it pertains to the same period. One of the reasons of my differences with my wife was undoubtedly the company of this friend. I was both a devoted and jealous husband, and this friend fanned the flame of my suspicions about my wife. I never could doubt his veracity, and I have never forgiven myself the violence of which I have been guilty in often having pained my wife by acting on his information. Perhaps only a Hindu wife would tolerate these hardships, and that is why I have regarded woman as an incarnation of tolerance. A servant wrongly suspected may throw up his job, a son in the same case may leave his father's roof, and a friend may put an end to the friendship. A wife, if she suspects her husband, will keep quiet, but if her husband suspects her, she is ruined. Where is she to go? A Hindu wife may not seek divorce in a law court. Law has no remedy for her, and I can never forget or forgive myself for having driven my wife to that desperation. The canker of suspicion was rooted out only when I understood ahimsa in all its bearings. I saw then the glory of brahmacharya and realized that the wife is not the husband's bond slave, but his companion and his helpmate and an equal partner in all his joys and sorrows, as free as the husband to choose her own path. Whenever I think of those dark days of doubts and suspicions, I am filled with loathing of my folly and my lustful cruelty, and I deplore my blind devotion to a friend. I have still to relate some of my failings during this meat-eating period and also previous to it, which date from before my marriage or soon after. A relative and I became fond of smoking. Not that we saw any good in smoking or were enamored of the smell of a cigarette. We simply imagined a sort of pleasure in emitting clouds of smoke from our mouths. My uncle had the habit, and when we saw him smoking, we thought we should copy his example. But we had no money, so we began to pilfer stumps of cigarettes thrown away by my uncle. The stumps, however, were not always available and could not emit much smoke either. So we began to steal coppers from the servants' pocket money in order to purchase Indian cigarettes. But the question was where to keep them. We could not, of course, smoke in the presence of elders. We managed somehow for a few weeks on these stolen coppers. In the meantime, we heard that the stalks of a certain plants were porous and could be smoked like cigarettes. We got them and began this kind of smoking. But we were far from being satisfied with such things as these. Our want of independence began to smart. It was unbearable that we should be unable to do anything without the elders' permission. At last, in sheer disgust, we decided to commit suicide. But how were we to do it? From where were we to get the poison? We heard that dhatura seeds were an effective poison. Off we went to the jungle in search of these seeds and got them. Evening was thought to be the auspicious hour. We went to Kedarji Mandir, put ghee in the temple lamp, had the darshan, and then looked for a lonely corner. But our courage failed us. Supposing we were not instantly killed? And what was the good of killing ourselves? Why not rather put up with the lack of independence? But we swallowed 2 or 3 seeds nevertheless. We dared not take more. Both of us fought shy of death and decided to go to Ramji Mandir to compose ourselves and to dismiss the thought of suicide. I realized that it was not as easy to commit suicide as to contemplate it. And since then, whenever I had heard of someone threatening to commit suicide, it has had little or no effect on me. The thought of suicide ultimately resulted in both of us bidding goodbye to the habit of smoking stumps of cigarettes and of stealing the servants' coppers for the purpose of smoking. Ever since I have been grown up, I have never desired to smoke and have always regarded the habit of smoking as barbarous, dirty and harmful. I have never understood why there is such a rage for smoking throughout the world. I cannot bear to travel in a compartment full of people smoking. I become choked. But much more serious than this theft was the one I was guilty of a little later. I pilfered the coppers when I was 12 or 13, possibly less. The other theft was committed when I was 15. In this case, I stole a bit of gold out of my meat-eating brother's armlet. This brother had run into a debt of about 25 rupees. He had on his arm an armlet of solid gold. It was not difficult to clip a bit out of it. Well, it was done and the debt cleared. But this became more than I could bear. I resolved never to steal again. I also made up my mind to confess it to my father. But I did not dare to speak. Not that I was afraid of my father beating me. No, I do not recall his ever having beaten any of us. I was afraid of the pain that I should cause him. But I felt that the risk should be taken, that there could not be a cleansing without a confession. I decided at last to write out the confession, to submit it to my father and ask his forgiveness. I wrote it on a slip of paper and handed it to him myself. In this note, not only did I confess my guilt, but I asked adequate punishment for it and closed with a request to him not to punish himself for my offense. I also pledged myself never to steal in future. I was trembling as I handed the confession to my father. He was then suffering from a fistula and was confined to bed. His bed was a plain wooden plank. I handed him the note and sat opposite the plank. He read it through and pearl drops trickled down his cheeks, wetting the paper. For a moment he closed his eyes in thought and then tore up the note. He had sat up to read it. He again lay down. I also cried. I could see my father's agony. If I were a painter, I could draw a picture of the whole scene today. It is still so vivid in my mind. Those pearl drops of love cleansed my heart and washed my sin away. Only he who has experienced such love can know what it is. As the hymn says, only he who is smitten with the arrows of love knows its power. This was for me an object lesson in ahimsa. Then I could read in it nothing more than a father's love, but today I know that it was pure ahimsa. When such ahimsa becomes all-embracing, it transforms everything it touches. There is no limit to its power. This sort of sublime forgiveness was not natural to my father. I had thought that he would be angry, say hard things and strike his forehead. But he was so wonderfully peaceful, and I believe this was due to my clean confession. A clean confession combined with a promise never to commit the sin again, when offered before one who has the right to receive it, is the purest type of repentance. I know that my confession made my father feel absolutely safe about me and increased his affection for me beyond measure. The time of which I am now speaking is my 16th year. My father, as we have seen, was bedridden, suffering from a fistula. My mother, an old servant of the house, and I were his principal attendants. I had the duties of a nurse, which mainly consisted in dressing the wound, giving my father his medicine, and compounding drugs whenever they had to be made up at home. Every night I massaged his legs and retired only when he asked me to do so or after he had fallen asleep. I loved to do this service. I do not remember ever having neglected it. All the time at my disposal after the performance of the daily duties was divided between school and attending on my father. I would only go out for an evening walk either when he permitted me or when he was feeling well. This was also the time when my wife was expecting a baby, a circumstance which, as I can see today, meant a double shame for me. For one thing, I did not restrain myself as I should have done whilst I was yet a student. And secondly, this carnal lust got the better of what I regarded as my duty to study, and of what was even a greater duty, my devotion to my parents, Shravana having been my ideal since childhood. Every night, whilst my hands were busy massaging my father's legs, my mind was hovering about the bedroom, and that too at a time when religion, medical science and common sense alike forbade sexual intercourse. I was always glad to be relieved from my duty and went straight to the bedroom after doing obeisance to my father. At the same time, my father was getting worse every day. Ayurvedic physicians had tried all their ointments, hakims their plasters, and local quacks their nostrums. An English surgeon had also used his skill. As the last and only resort, he had recommended a surgical operation. But the family physician came in the way. He disapproved of an operation being performed at such an advanced age. The physician was competent and well known, and his advice prevailed. The operation was abandoned, and various medicines purchased for the purpose were of no account. I have an impression that if the physician had allowed the operation, the wound would have been easily healed. The operation also was to have been performed by a surgeon who was then well known in Bombay, but God had willed otherwise. When death is imminent, who can think of the right remedy? My father returned from Bombay with all the paraphernalia of the operation, which were now useless. He despaired of living any longer. He was getting weaker and weaker until at last he had to be asked to perform the necessary functions in bed. But up to the last he refused to do anything of the kind, always insisting on going through the strain of leaving his bed. The Vaishnavite rules about external cleanliness are so inexorable. Such cleanliness is quite essential, no doubt, but Western medical science has taught us that all the functions, including a bath, can be done in bed with the strictest regard to cleanliness and without the slightest discomfort to the patient, the bed always remaining spotlessly clean. I should regard such cleanliness as quite consistent with the Vaishnavism. But my father's insistence on leaving the bed only struck me with wonder then, and I had nothing but admiration for it. The dreadful night came. My uncle was then in Rajkot. I have a faint recollection that he came to Rajkot, having had news that my father was getting worse. The brothers were deeply attached to each other. My uncle would sit near my father's bed the whole day and would insist on sleeping by his bedside after sending us all to sleep. No one had dreamt that this was to be the fateful night. The danger, of course, was there. It was 10:30 or 11 p.m. I was giving the massage. My uncle offered to relieve me. I was glad and went straight to the bedroom. My wife, poor thing, was fast asleep. But how could she sleep when I was there? I woke her up. In 5 or 6 minutes, however, the servant knocked at the door. I started with alarm. "Get up," he said. "Father is very ill." I knew, of course, that he was very ill, and so I guessed what very ill meant at that moment. I sprang out of bed. "What is the matter? Do tell me." "Father is no more." So all was over. I had but to wring my hands. I felt deeply ashamed and miserable. I ran to my father's room. I saw that if animal passion had not blinded me, I should have been spared the torture of separation from my father during his last moments. I should have been massaging him, and he would have died in my arms. But now it was my uncle who had this privilege. He was so deeply devoted to his elder brother that he had earned the honor of doing him the last services. My father had forebodings of the coming event. He had made a sign for pen and paper and written, "Prepare for the last rites." He had then snapped the amulet off his arm and also his gold necklace of tulasi beads and flung them aside. A moment after this he was no more. The shame to which I have referred in a foregoing chapter was this shame of my carnal desire, even at the critical hour of my father's death, which demanded wakeful service. It was a blot I have never been able to efface or forget, and I have always thought that although my devotion to my parents knew no bounds and I would have given up anything for it, yet it was weighed and found unpardonably wanting because my mind was at the same moment in the grip of lust. I have therefore always regarded myself as a lustful though a faithful husband. It took me long to get free from the shackles of lust, and I had to pass through many ordeals before I could overcome it. Before I close the chapter of my double shame, I may mention that the poor mite that was born to my wife scarcely breathed for more than 3 or 4 days. Nothing else could be expected. Let all those who are married be warned by my example. From my 6th or 7th year up to my 16th, I was at school being taught all sort of things except religion. I may say that I failed to get from the teachers what they could have given me without any effort on their part. And yet I kept on picking up things here and there from my surroundings. The term religion I am using in its broadest sense, meaning thereby self-realization or knowledge of self. Being born in the Vaishnava faith, I had often to go to the Haveli, but it never appealed to me. I did not like its glitter and pomp. Also, I heard rumors of immorality being practiced there and lost all interest in it. Hence, I could gain nothing from the Haveli. But what I failed to get there, I obtained from my nurse, an old servant of the family, whose affection for me I still recall. I have said before that there was in me a fear of ghosts and spirits. Rambha, for that was her name, suggested as a remedy for this fear the repetition of Ramanama. I had more faith in her than in her remedy, and so at a tender age I began repeating Ramanama to cure my fear of ghosts and spirits. This was of course short-lived, but the good seed sown in childhood was not sown in vain. I think it is due to the seed sown by that good woman Rambha that today Ramanama is an infallible remedy for me. Just about this time, a cousin of mine who was a devotee of the Ramayana arranged for my second brother and me to learn Rama Raksha. We got it by heart and made it a rule to recite it every morning after the bath. The practice was kept up as long as we were in Porbandar. As soon as we reached Rajkot, it was forgotten, for I had not much belief in it. I recited it partly because of my pride in being able to recite Rama Raksha with the correct pronunciation. What, however, left a deep impression on me was the reading of the Ramayana before my father. During part of his illness, my father was in Porbandar. There every evening he used to listen to the Ramayana. The reader was a great devotee of Rama, Ladha Maharaj of Bileshwar. It was said of him that he cured himself of his leprosy not by any medicine but by applying to the affected parts bilva leaves which had been cast away after being offered to the image of Mahadeva in Bileshwar temple, and by the regular repetition of Ramanama. His faith in it, it was said, had made him whole. This may or may not be true. We at any rate believed the story. And it is a fact that when Ladha Maharaj began his reading of the Ramayana, his body was entirely free from leprosy. He had a melodious voice. He would sing the dohas and chaupais and explain them, losing himself in the discourse and carrying his listeners along with him. I must have been 13 at that time, but I quite remember being enraptured by his reading. That laid the foundation of my deep devotion to the Ramayana. Today I regard the Ramayana of Tulsidas as the greatest book in all devotional literature. A few months after this we came to Rajkot. There was no Ramayana reading there. The Bhagavat, however, used to be read on every Ekadashi day. Sometimes I attended the reading, but the reciter was uninspiring. Today I see that the Bhagavat is a book which can evoke religious fervor. I have read it in Gujarati with intense interest. But when I heard portions of the original read by Pandit Madan Mohan Malaviya during my 21 days of fast, I wished I had heard it in my childhood from such a devotee as he is, so that I could have formed a liking for it at an early age. Impressions formed at that age strike roots deep down into one's nature, and it is my perpetual regret that I was not fortunate enough to hear more good books of this kind read during that period. In Rajkot, however, I got an early grounding in toleration for all branches of Hinduism and sister religions. For my father and mother would visit the Haveli as also Shiva's and Rama's temples and would take or send us youngsters there. Jain monks also would pay frequent visits to my father and would even go out of their way to accept food from us, non-Jains. They would have talks with my father on subjects religious and mundane. He had besides Musalman and Parsi friends who would talk to him about their faiths, and he would listen to them always with respect and often with interest. Being his nurse, I often had a chance to be present at these talks. These many things combined to inculcate in me a toleration for all faith. Only Christianity was at that time an exception. I developed a sort of dislike for it, and for a reason. In those days, Christian missionaries used to stand in a corner near the high school and hold forth, pouring abuse on Hindus and their gods. I could not endure this. I must have stood there to hear them once only, but that was enough to dissuade me from repeating the experiment. About the same time, I heard of a well-known Hindu having been converted to Christianity. It was the talk of the town that when he was baptized, he had to eat beef and drink liquor, that he also had to change his clothes, and that thenceforth he began to go about in European costume, including a hat. These things got on my nerves. Surely, thought I, a religion that compelled one to eat beef, drink liquor, and change one's own clothes did not deserve the name. I also heard that the new convert had already begun abusing the religion of his ancestors, their customs, and their country. All these things created in me a dislike for Christianity. But the fact that I had learned to be tolerant to other religions did not mean that I had any living faith in God. I happened about this time to come across Manusmriti, which was amongst my father's collection. The story of the creation and similar things in it did not impress me very much, but on the contrary made me incline somewhat towards atheism. There was a cousin of mine still alive, for whose intellect I had great regard. To him I turned with my doubts, but he could not resolve them. He sent me away with his answer, "When you grow up, you will be able to solve these doubts yourself. These questions ought not to be raised at your age." I was silenced but was not comforted. Chapters about diet and the like in Manusmriti seemed to me to run contrary to daily practice. To my doubts as to this also, I got the same answer. With intellect more developed and with more reading, I shall understand it better, I said to myself. Manusmriti at any rate did not then teach me ahimsa. I have told the story of my meat eating. Manusmriti seemed to support it. I also felt that it was quite moral to kill serpents, bugs and the like. I remember to have killed at that age bugs and such other insects, regarding it as a duty. But one thing took deep root in me, the conviction that morality is the basis of things and that truth is the substance of all morality. Truth became my sole objective. It began to grow in magnitude every day, and my definition of it also has been ever widening. A Gujarati didactic stanza likewise gripped my mind and heart. Its precept, written good for evil, became my guiding principle. It became such a passion with me that I began numerous experiments in it. Here are those wonderful lines. For a bowl of water give a goodly meal, for a kindly greeting bow thou down with zeal, for a simple penny pay thou back with gold, if thy life be rescued, life do not withhold. Thus the words and actions of the wise regard, every little service tenfold they reward. But the truly noble know all men as one, and return with gladness good for evil done. I passed the matriculation examination in 1887. It then used to be held at two centers, Ahmedabad and Bombay. The general poverty of the country naturally led Kathiawad students to prefer the nearer and the cheaper center. The poverty of my family likewise dictated to me the same choice. This was my first journey from Rajkot to Ahmedabad, and that too without a companion. My elders wanted me to pursue my studies at college after the matriculation. There was a college in Bhavnagar as well as in Bombay, and as the former was cheaper, I decided to go there and join the Samal Das College. I went but found myself entirely at sea. Everything was difficult. I could not follow, let alone taking interest in, the professors' lectures. It was no fault of theirs. The professors in that college were regarded as first rate, but I was so raw. At the end of the first term, I returned home. We had in Mavji Dave, who was a shrewd and learned Brahman, an old friend and advisor of the family. He had kept up his connection with the family even after my father's death. He had happened to visit us during my vacation. In conversation with my mother and elder brother, he inquired about my studies. Learning that I was at Samaldas College, he said, "The times are changed, and none of you can expect to succeed to your father's Gandhi without having had a proper education. Now, as the boy is still pursuing his studies, you should all look to him to keep the Gandhi. It will take him 4 or 5 years to get his BA degree, which will at best qualify him for a 60 rupees post, not for a diwanship. If, like my son, he went in for law, it would take him longer still, by which time there would be a host of lawyers aspiring for a diwan's post. I would far rather that you sent him to England. My son Kavalram says it is very easy to become a barrister. In 3 years' time he will return. Also, expenses will not exceed 4 to 5,000 rupees. Think of that barrister who has just come back from England. How stylishly he lives. He could get the diwanship for the asking. I would strongly advise you to send Mohandas to England this very year. Kavalram has numerous friends in England. He will give notes of introduction to them, and Mohandas will have an easy time of it there." Joshiji, that is how we used to call old Mavji Dave, turned to me with complete assurance and asked, "Would you not rather go to England than study here?" Nothing could have been more welcome to me. I was fighting shy of my difficult studies. So I jumped at the proposal and said that the sooner I was sent, the better. It was no easy business to pass examinations quickly. Could I not be sent to qualify for the medical profession? My brother interrupted me. Father never liked it. He had you in mind when he said that we Vaishnavas should have nothing to do with the dissection of dead bodies. Father intended you for the bar. Joshiji chimed in. I am not opposed to the medical profession as was Gandhiji. Our Shastras are not against it. But a medical degree will not make a Diwan of you, and I want you to be Diwan, or if possible, something better. Only in that way could you take under your protecting care your large family. The times are fast changing and getting harder every day. It is the wisest thing, therefore, to become a barrister. Turning to my mother, he said, "Now I must leave. Pray ponder over what I have said. When I come here next, I shall expect to hear of preparations for England. Be sure to let me know if I can assist in any way." Joshiji went away, and I began building castles in the air. My elder brother was greatly exercised in his mind. How was he to find the wherewithal to send me? And was it proper to trust a young man like me to go abroad alone? My mother was sorely perplexed. She did not like the idea of parting with me. This is how she tried to put me off. "Uncle," she said, "is now the eldest member of the family. He should first be consulted. If he consents, we will consider the matter." My brother had another idea. He said to me, "We have a certain claim on the Porbandar state. Mr. Lely is the administrator. He thinks highly of our family, and uncle is in his good books. It is just possible that he might recommend you for some state help for your education in England." I liked all this and got ready to start off for Porbandar. There was no railway in those days. It was a 5 days bullock cart journey. I have already said that I was a coward. But at that moment my cowardice vanished before the desire to go to England, which completely possessed me. I hired a bullock cart as far as Dhauraji, and from Dhauraji I took a camel in order to get to Porbandar a day quicker. This was my first camel ride. I arrived at last, did obeisance to my uncle and told him everything. He thought it over and said, "I am not sure whether it is possible for one to stay in England without prejudice to one's own religion. From all I have heard, I have my doubts. When I meet these big barristers, I see no difference between their life and that of Europeans. They know no scruples regarding food. Cigars are never out of their mouths. They dress as shamelessly as Englishmen. All that would not be in keeping with our family tradition. I am shortly going on a pilgrimage and have not many years to live. At the threshold of death, how dare I give you permission to go to England to cross the seas? But I will not stand in your way. It is your mother's permission which really matters. If she permits you, then Godspeed. Tell her I will not interfere. You will go with my blessings." "I could expect nothing more from you," said I. "I shall now try to win mother over. But would you not recommend me to Mr. Lilly?" "How can I do that?" said he. "But he is a good man. You ask for an appointment, telling him how you are connected. He will certainly give you one and may even help you." I cannot say why my uncle did not give me a note of recommendation. I have a faint idea that he hesitated to cooperate directly in my going to England, which was in his opinion an irreligious act. I wrote to Mr. Lilly, who asked me to see him at his residence. He saw me as he was ascending the staircase and saying curtly, "Pass your BA first and then see me. No help can be given to you now." He hurried upstairs. I had made elaborate preparations to meet him. I had carefully leant up a few sentences and had bowed low and saluted him with both hands, but all to no purpose. I thought of my wife's ornaments. I thought of my elder brother, in whom I had the utmost faith. He was generous to a fault, and he loved me as his own son. I returned to Rajkot from Porbandar and reported all that had happened. I consulted Joshiji, who of course advised even incurring a debt if necessary. I suggested the disposal of my wife's ornaments, which could fetch about 2 or 3,000 rupees. My brother promised to find the money somehow. My mother, however, was still unwilling. She had begun making minute inquiries. Someone had told her that young men got lost in England. Someone else had said that they took to meat, and yet another that they could not live there without liquor. "How about all this?" she asked me. I said, "Will you not trust me? I shall not lie to you. I swear that I shall not touch any of those things. If there were any such danger, would Joshiji let me go?" "I can trust you," she said. "But how can I trust you in a distant land? I am dazed and know not what to do. I will ask Becharji Swami." Becharji Swami was originally a Madhubaniya, but had now become a Jain monk. He too was a family advisor like Joshiji. He came to my help and said, "I shall get the boy solemnly to take the 3 vows, and then he can be allowed to go." He administered the oath, and I vowed not to touch wine, woman and meat. This done, my mother gave her permission. The high school had a send-off in my honor. It was an uncommon thing for a young man of Rajkot to go to England. I had written out a few words of thanks, but I could scarcely stammer them out. I remember how my head reeled and how my whole frame shook as I stood up to read them. With the blessings of my elders, I started for Bombay. This was my first journey from Rajkot to Bombay. My brother accompanied me. But there is many a slip twixt the cup and the lip. There were difficulties to be faced in Bombay. With my mother's permission and blessings, I set off exultantly for Bombay, leaving my wife with a baby of a few months. But on arrival there, Friends told my brother that the Indian Ocean was rough in June and July, and as this was my first voyage, I should not be allowed to sail until November. Someone also reported that a steamer had just been sunk in a gale. This made my brother uneasy, and he refused to take the risk of allowing me to sail immediately. Leaving me with a friend in Bombay, he returned to Rajkot to resume his duty. He put the money for my travelling expenses in the keeping of a brother-in-law and left word with some friends to give me whatever help I might need. Time hung heavily on my hands in Bombay. I dreamt continually of going to England. Meanwhile, my caste people were agitated over my going abroad. No Modh Banya had been to England up to now, and if I dared to do so, I ought to be brought to book. A general meeting of the caste was called, and I was summoned to appear before it. I went. Now I suddenly managed to muster up courage, I do not know. Nothing daunted, and without the slightest hesitation, I came before the meeting. The Sheth, the headman of the community, who was distantly related to me and had been on very good terms with my father, thus accosted me. In the opinion of the caste, your proposal to go to England is not proper. Our religion forbids voyages abroad. We had also heard that it is not possible to live there without compromising religion. One is obliged to eat and drink with the Europeans. To which I replied, I do not think it is at all against our religion to go to England. I intend going there for further studies, and I have solemnly promised to my mother to abstain from 3 things you fear most. I am sure the vow will keep me safe. But we tell you, rejoined the Sheth, that it is not possible to keep our religion there. You know my relations with your father, and you ought to listen to my advice. I know those relations, said I, and you are as an elder to me, but I am helpless in this matter. I cannot alter my resolve to go to England. My father's friend and adviser, who is a learned Brahman, sees no objection to my going to England, and my mother and brother have also given me their permission. But will you disregard the orders of the caste? I am really helpless. I think the caste should not interfere in the matter. This incensed the Sheth. He swore at me. I sat unmoved. So the Sheth pronounced his order. This boy shall be treated as an outcast from today. Whoever helps him or goes to see him off at the dock shall be punishable with a fine of 1 rupee 4 annas. The order had no effect on me, and I took my leave of the Sheth. But I wondered how my brother would take it. Fortunately, he remained firm and wrote to assure me that I had his permission to go, the Sheth's order notwithstanding. The incident, however, made me more anxious than ever to sail. What would happen if they succeeded in bringing pressure to bear on my brother? Supposing something unforeseen happened, as I was thus worrying over my predicament, I heard that a Junagadh Vakil was going to England for being called to the bar by a boat sailing on the 4th of September. I met the friends to whose care my brother had commended me. They also agreed that I should not let go the opportunity of going in such company. There was no time to be lost. I wired to my brother for permission, which he granted. I asked my brother-in-law to give me the money, but he referred to the order of the Sheth and said that he could not afford to lose caste. I then sought a friend of the family and requested him to accommodate me to the extent of my passage and sunrise, and to recover the loan from my brother. The friend was not only good enough to accede to my request, but he cheered me up as well. I was so thankful. With part of the money, I at once purchased the passage. Then I had to equip myself for the voyage. There was another friend who had experience in the matter. He got clothes and other things ready. Some of the clothes I liked and some I did not like at all. The necktie, which I delighted in wearing later, I then abhorred. The short jacket I looked upon as immodest. But this dislike was nothing before the desire to go to England, which was uppermost in me. Of provisions also I had enough and to spare for the voyage. A berth was reserved for me by my friends in the same cabin as that of Sergeant Trayambak Rai Mazumdar, the Junagadh Vakil. They also commended me to him. He was an experienced man of mature age and knew the world. I was yet a stripling of 18 without any experience of the world. Sergeant Mazumdar told my friends not to worry about me. I sailed at last from Bombay on the 4th of September.